we'll do the French knot stitch. The French knot stitch can get a little difficult at times, but it's a really fun way to fill in or add detail to a project. So you're going to do, and then this is going to be more of a filling stitch instead of a kind of running stitch where it kind of outlines things. It'll fill it in more like the chain stitch. So we're going to just pick a place and pick the end of the E to come up. And what you're going to do is you're going to have your needle pretty close to your pattern, to your fabric. You're going to, like so, and you're going to wrap your needle around, your floss around your needle a few times. I'll do 4. So you keep it pretty tight and close, and then you go just right next to, but not down the same hole. So you come up and go down through the fabric. The problems of a needle, and just kind of carefully pull along, and that's a French knot. And so move a little bit further, and come up again, and you can vary the number of times you wrap the floss around your needle. You want to do it at least once, but I would probably cap it at about 5. The more you knot it, the thicker the knot. We're doing 4 for now, and you want to go really close to it to keep that knotted effect, but not down the same hole or it'll just unravel or make a big mess. Just pull it tight. And it can very easily look wonky if you're not careful, and then you just have to go and figure out a way to fix it. There's not a good way to fix a French knot, which is part of this problem. Just kind of close and down and through. And we're just going to go along the E. And done. So knot it in the back, go under the last stitch, catching other, going under one stitch, making a loop and taking the back of the needle, going through that loop, and knotted. And so one thing you can do is if you vary the number of times you knot around your needle or the number of threads in your floss, that can give you a whole different look at what you're trying to do. And so the last stitch we're going to learn is a fill stitch. And filling in an area versus outlining it or adding some extra depth. And so we're going to be learning the satin stitch. And so there's 2 ways to do the satin stitch. I'm going to show you the full satin stitch. It takes a little longer, it takes up more thread, but it really helps add extra dimension to what you're doing. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our thread and we're going to go along the A doing a back stitch. And so that back stitch is going to add some extra oomph to the satin stitch. And so I'll go on the inside and I'll show you why in a minute. Just do a back stitch for a minute. Now that you've either done a running stitch or a back stitch along the kind of inside of your design, I'm going to pick a starting place. And I'll start here. So we're going to just go right above. Right here, and then just over, covering the whole design. And then what we're going to do is come back right next to where we first came up, right at the top of the A, pretty close to next to it. Oh, we caught some floss. That happens sometimes. And so you just go in back and pull it straight out. And go back down. And right next to that again. And so this means it's a full satin stitch. So I'll show you a half satin stitch in just a second. So a half satin stitch is, instead of coming up here, you go right next to where you just went down and come up, go back down. And so either way, it's going to take up a lot of space in the back, and it's going to eat up a lot of thread. So it's up to you what you want to do. Personally, I find that the full satin stitch really catches everything very smoothly, and it's a little easier to fill in on the front. And the front of your design is a lot more important than how much floss you use, because you can always get more at the craft store. So I'm going to do one more half satin just to get it right again. And you just cover it and go with the angling. And I will offer one tip of advice. When you're doing a circle, which I'll draw real quick for you, we won't stitch it in, but if you do a circle like this, because this is so important, when you do a satin stitch, you don't go all the way over to either end of the circle. You always leave, and this is why it's best to have the back stitch or the running stitch put in and then do the satin stitch, because it also gives some more body, but then it also, when you're doing circles, fills in that last stitch. Because if you go out one extra stitch, say you get to here on your stitch, you do this one last little bit, it stops looking like a circle and more like an oval. And so if you want to keep it as a circle, just stop yourself from one more stitch right at the very edge of the circle. And so back to stitching. And so this takes a while, and it eats up floss. And you just go with the curve of your design, which can take some getting used to. And because it uses up so much fabric, I don't use it as much. But I also always worry, as a general word to the wise, you don't want to do very big fill stitches. Like this is probably about as big as I'd recommend, unless you were hanging it. Because if you're using it as a pillowcase or a bag or on a shirt, if it's very big, it's got that much more of a chance to get caught and pulled. And so I always worry about that. So I always kind of avoid using the satin stitch, just out of general paranoia's sake. I'm just going to go along. And it's such a tight curve here that it would be very hard the first time. And like I said, don't use it a lot. I'm just going to cover it. And so that's also a nice thing about doing not quite an outline, an inner outline, is that it helps fill in accidental gaps. So it's not nearly as obvious. You just do this all around. So come up, go over, there we are. And it's knotted. And then since I know I'm done, I'm just going to go ahead and trim about 1/8 of an inch this excess floss. Hopefully look a little neater in the back. Always be careful you don't snip a stitch though. Nothing is sadder And you'll notice I am not as well practiced at the satin stitch as I probably should be. So now that this is done, we're going to unhoop. And then since I used water-soluble marker, I'm going to wash this up. I'm going to rinse it, but you can wash it following fabric care instructions, or you could just rinse it under some water. But I usually like washing it with some soap to really get rid of this marker. And then I'm going to lay it flat to dry, and I'm going to iron it out. And so I'll show you how to hoop in just a second. But always be careful to lay it flat out to dry, and this is part of the reason why we like to unhoop when we're not actively working on the project, because it's got this crease now, but if you rinse it out and iron it, it'll go away. But if you left it hooped all the time, it has a better chance of being kind of permanently warped and really messing with it. Thankfully, I used a bigger hoop than my final project. That's another tip when you're doing that. But now we're all set, and we're going to get this washed up and ready to show you how to hoop a project when you're all done. Stay tuned for part 5.